Products can't be sustainable on its own. So, we talk about sustainable products and buying sustainable things, but actually it doesn't matter how good your product is, it can never be sustainable. I used to be a product designer. This is kind of why I moved to service design. Because a product is a part of a system. It's a state within a system, similar to like buying it at the shop or whatever else it is, and a product is usually made up of loads and loads of different components. In a mobile phone, there's something like, I think there's about 80 or over 100 components in a mobile phone. So it's a really kind of temporary state of a system. And I think that that's kind of what's led to this linear economy that we have, where we're designing for that one state, but we're not thinking about the rest of the system. And that's why we end up with stuff that goes into landfill. And if we end up thinking about a circular economy, what we end up with is something like this. The circular economy is basically a tiered system of reducing, reusing, recycling. It used to be the 3 R's. So it used to be recycling and reducing, reusing, but now it's about sort of 7 R's. But the principles of a circular economy obviously been around for a lot longer than the term circular economy has been coined. So Gina was talking about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and those are the guys that have really kind of put the circular economy on the map and started to have it talked about in big businesses. But it's been going a lot longer than that. And actually, even in 1973, when Caterpillar started up the Reman plant that they have, which is basically remanufacturing, that's been going for a long, long time. And I went to a launch of a remanufacturing report on Monday in Parliament, and now talking about this as a really big thing that they want to push forwards as a part of the UK's strategy for reshoring and for basically becoming a little bit more independent and actually making more of the resources that we have. But it just seems strange that these guys have been doing it for 3 decades, or over 3 decades, 4 decades now. And we've just sort of cottoned onto this all of a sudden. And now it's being put up as this, rebranded and put up as this sort of new ideal. But even going back further than that, during the war, you had things like Make to Amend, which is really kind of about, cutting up clothes and making more use of them, or making more of the resources that you had, because they have very limited or rationed resources. But today, we have the same thing. We have these parties where people go along and they swap clothes, they cut them up and they make new clothes, and we call it swishing. So we kind of rebranded that again. And it goes back even further than that. Actually how you manage your resources has been really important all the way through history. So as I say, it used to be called reduce, reuse, recycle, and now there's sort of 7 R's rather than the 3 original ones. But actually, the circular economy has never been more important than it is today. It's not to trivialise what the circular economy is, or to say, the fact that it's been around for so long. It doesn't mean to say that it's not important right now, because it is. It's actually very much of this moment, which is why it's so important in getting it into business and getting business to take on those principles. And actually, quite often, it's business who's pioneering the circular economy agenda rather than government, which is unfortunate, really. And it's really being led by this convergence of impacts that are related to the stuff that we buy, the things that are all around us, our man-made environment. And you see some of these impacts, they're causing systemic problems around, well, many of these, if you saw the whole slide, you'd see quite a few more problems up there. But there's material access, there's geopolitics, there's land access, food, pollution, peak resources, economic crisis, social mobility, air quality, global warming, the list goes on and on and on. And that's all related systemically to how we consume stuff. So you take a mobile phone, pretty much everybody's got a mobile phone in the world now. I'm not sure what the stats are on that, but there's pretty much one mobile phone for every person, I think. And you look at what a mobile phone is made up of. This is what makes up an iPhone. So you look at the periodic table elements. There's about 1/3 of those elements used in the periodic table are in your phone, in your pocket, which is quite incredible. And actually, when you think about all of the resources that are used in that mobile phone and how many of them are considered to be scarce or have a future that's at risk because of the overconsumption. It's the ones in pink. There's a lot of materials in that phone that are actually the government are kind of quite worried about because of the strategic positioning and the impact on the economy that they're going to have. So 80% of manufacturers are now considering access to resources and materials to be the biggest threat to their future, which is a really powerful impact. This is why it's driving the business agenda, because it's becoming about profits and about actually how do we make more money out of selling less stuff. So actually gaining more access or more control over the materials that we have is a really, really important thing. Not only to our environment, but to business in general. And to give you a case study of that, this is a little case study about geopolitics. So one of the materials that is in demand and maybe a little bit threatening our economy is neodymium. So neodymium is a magnet. It's what you use to make magnets. It lasts a really long time, thousands of years. So it's a really high quality, high grade material. And it's used in all of these products. So everything from speakers to hard drives, but also the really important green technologies that we have as well, or want to use and pioneer. Things like wind turbines, electric cars. Neodymium is really important to all of those things. But China are now trying to monopolize all of the rare earth materials. So pretty much all of those pink materials that you saw in the phone, as well as neodymium and all sorts of other stuff, is trying to strategically be monopolized by China. And they're basically mining about 97% of the world's rare earth materials, which is a lot of materials, or a lot of control of that market. So they're trying to make sure that all of those materials are processed within their borders. And the really scary thing about that is that China's gone from exporting 75% of its resources and things that it mines to only exporting 25%. And it's using the rest to kind of meet demand within its own economy. So if we don't have materials, we can't make stuff, which means that we can't make our own economy go forwards. And this is why China is positioning themselves in this way to be able to support their own future and the growth of their own country. They're doing it really, really well. But it's not, you can't blame them for that necessarily. The British Empire was built on similar sort of stuff as well. We tried to monopolize different markets, whether it be spices or whatever else. So the thing is though, we have all of these materials in the UK already because we're huge consumers of stuff. And yet what we do is to quite often, at the end of its life, export it and then send it somewhere else. And usually it's sent off as waste, which is basically stuff that we're just trying to get rid of and actually not seen as a resource that has a value. But that's starting to change. And I'll give you an example. So this is a project that I worked on. So one of my clients called Kyocera. Have you got a drink of water, Mike? Yeah, sure. And so one of my clients called Kyocera, and they make these photocopiers. Photocopiers are really complicated things. And actually this company make them in Japan. So it's a Japanese company. They make and design and manufacture all of this stuff. And Japan is about 10 years ahead of what we are in the UK in terms of their regulation and their systems for controlling resources and recycling. Because they're already designed and manufactured in Japan, they're designed for disassembly already, and then they're exported over here. So actually, how can we make more of those products that are already designed for disassembly and kind of upskill the UK recycling system? This was a challenge in this product. But products, and particularly printers and photocopiers, are really, really complex things. So there's about 536 components in this machine. This is just a normal desktop printer. And if you get a recycler trying to take that apart, it's really hard to understand what materials each of those components are made out of, let alone what things or what components are good to be reused or have value in terms of a second life, or can be repaired, or can be used in the best way or most efficient way within the circular economy hierarchy. So what we found was that basically the value chain, the problem was that the value chain wasn't communicating, they wasn't talking to each other. And the recyclers weren't talking to the people who would send the stuff off at the end of life. So they wouldn't know what could be recycled where. Kyocera weren't necessarily talking to the recyclers, and they weren't talking to their customers. So the customers didn't know where to send the products, the recyclers didn't know what were in the machines. And so the best thing that we found, or the most effective thing that we did, was to get all of the stakeholders around one table and see what they knew, get them talking to each other, and actually see where the barriers were. And it was all around communication. It was really interesting. It was, the biggest problem within the circular economy, in my experience, is actually communication and flow of information, which sits really well with you guys because you're all really interested in open data and actually sharing information anyway. And actually, I did a talk about this at Nesta and used case studies from two Geovation products, which was really helpful. So, talking about the consequences of getting this wrong, some of this stuff is a little bit scary and kind of, you can see that that's important. But the stuff that really scares me is not the stuff that I've shown you. The stuff that really scares me is sea waste or sea plastics. So this is actually Hawaii. There's loads of sea plastics in Hawaii. And the problem with it is that the birds and the wildlife pick it up and you end up with scenes like this. It's pretty stark, pretty horrific. You can see lighters in the gut of the bird, and there's all sorts of other bits of waste in there as well. They pick them up thinking that it's stuff that they can build their nests with, and they end up swallowing it and all sorts of other things. Yeah, it's not very nice, but it actually kind of gets worse than that as well. I mean, it's estimated that there's probably a piece of plastic inside every seabird out there now, beyond a certain age anyway. But it kind of gets worse than that. So the thing about plastic is that it never actually biodegrades. Every piece of plastic that has ever been made, apart from stuff that's been incinerated, is still around today. And a lot of it's in the sea. So it doesn't biodegrade, it photodegrades. So it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, but it's still the same piece of plastic. It breaks up. And it breaks up until it gets into the size of plankton. So when it gets to the size of plankton, it finds its way into the food system because fish eat it up and other parts of the ecosystem take it in as plankton or whatever else. And it has chemicals in it which have this sort of estrogenic effect, which are really bad for the reproductive systems of all sorts of animals. And it's not a small problem, it's a big problem. It's a very, very big problem. The ocean currents take all of the plastic, or a lot of the plastic, to sort of 5 main points around the globe. And these ones in the middle, this is the Pacific Garbage Patch, what we call the Pacific Garbage Patch. And it's about twice the size of Texas, which is really, really big. You think about how big Texas is. This is a considerable problem. And then there's 5 other what we call gyres around the world as well. Or 4 other gyres around the world, which are these ocean currents that gather this plastic up into these different locations. And the thing is that although it's terrible that we're having this effect on the ecosystems, and we're actually losing a lot of biodiversity because the ecosystems are collapsing in many cases, it's having a real impact on us as well, because we're at the top of the food chain. And as we're at the top of the food chain, as the plastics move through that food chain and the chemicals that are in them, they become more concentrated. So actually the breast milk of Inuits is now considered to be toxic by the UN because they're at the top of the food chain and they eat so much fish, which is pretty horrific, really. So this is what all of the things that could go wrong, one of the examples of things that could go wrong, if we don't get plastic sorted out and start working out how to recycle them and to make more value out of managing that resource in a correct way. But I think, I was trying to work out how to not end on such a gloomy note. I think it's easy to be kind of paralysed by this sort of stuff and not want to go forwards. And I think that's kind of really the wrong way to do it. I think you need to look at actually how to get this to motivate you to kind of solving some of those problems, because it's really a big fundamental problem of society. And I think that even if you're solving a small problem, that's still a contribution. You just start small. There's no problem that's too small in this scenario. If we all do a little bit, then we can all kind of move forwards, and that's great. But I also think we need to not manage waste. We need to not kind of try to stop waste being put into waste streams or whatever else it is, or minimising waste. We need to start managing resources, because this is actually a more profitable, more positive way of looking at this, and there's a business model for it, and an incentive to actually doing that, and actually making the system work. And if the system works properly, then we don't have waste. We design waste out altogether if we manage resources properly. So that's really the goal. But that's it, really. Yeah. Thank you.